Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. It's been a strange week, hasn't it? I'm glad it's over. Almost. I miss you guys being here. It's strange to be in this library without all of you guys. All right. I'm glad you've been watching the videos. Just a little more information about George Washington and the Revolutionary War, which is really what this whole book is about. Okay? Might post one more today. Okay. So, Phoebe has settled into Mortier House. That is where George Washington lives when he's in New York. And she's a housekeeper. And every day she does her job, but she also listens to conversations whenever she can. Okay, each day at noon, she took a basket and went down to the waterfront to do the day's marketing. When she was finished, she would make her way to the edge of the harbor and stand looking out over the ocean. No one took any notice of her in her clean white apron and cap, a shawl thrown across her shoulders. Nor did anyone particularly notice the man who always came to stand beside her, his curly hair powdered and pulled back, his brown face plump and smiling. The two of them would stand together for a few moments, seeming to talk of nothing important. Sometimes Phoebe would throw out a few crumbs to the gulls, which would gather noisily at their feet. After a time, they would move off in different directions. Phoebe back to Mortier House, Sam Francis back to the Queen's Head. Phoebe never had anything to report. She was particularly careful to watch every member of the general's bodyguard who came to the house. None was called by a name starting with T, and they all seemed to be truly fond of the general and laughed and joked with him. All right. Here she is with her father. Two members of the bodyguard did stand out from the others. One was especially nice. Mr. Hickey was his name. He smiled at Phoebe while she was serving and often came into the kitchen to joke with her and Mary while Mary was preparing the meals. Phoebe was the youngest servant in the house except for Pompey. When the others were talking, she often felt left out. She was glad to have someone to talk to. Hickey seemed much younger than the older men, not much older, in fact, than Phoebe herself. And he seemed glad to talk to her, too. Like Phoebe, he seemed not to have many friends. Phoebe often saw him sitting by himself at the edge of the woods. Right. Here's Mr. Hickey, sitting by himself. But he seems very nice, and he talks to Phoebe all the time. Mr. Green, I don't know why my camera's flashing like that. I don't know if you're seeing that or not. Okay. Mr. Green was another member of General Washington's bodyguard who kept to himself, but he was not like Hickey. He never spoke to Phoebe at all. Even when he saw her in the yard, Phoebe would always say, "Evening, sir." But he never so much as looked at her. From what she could tell, he didn't say much to anyone, even at dinner time, when everyone did a lot of talking. Though his name didn't begin with a T, Phoebe made up her mind to watch him very carefully. There was something about him she didn't like. So here is Mr. Green. Not so friendly. One day, when Hickey came to the kitchen, he had a small cloth bag with him. He handed it to Phoebe. "Here," he said, "it's some seed for your precious chickens." Phoebe was surprised. She didn't know anyone had noticed that she fed them. She opened the bag. "But it's good seed, sir," she protested. "It's too good to feed the chickens." Hickey laughed. "Oh, it's only the king's true men who'll be missing it," he said. "Let's see if your chickens will get fatter from British grain than from American breadcrumbs." Phoebe smiled. She didn't ask him how he'd got the seed, but he began to bring it home to her often. Sometimes he would bring it himself. Other times she would find a bag lying on the table when she came into the kitchen. Sometimes there'd be a bright ribbon tied around it. Then Hickey would say, "The ribbon's for you, pretty Phoebe. Compliments of King George III." Sometimes there'd be a stick of candy inside. Always, he said, stolen from those loyal to the King of England. Soon she was looking forward to his visits every day, and as the days went by and Phoebe still could find no one who seemed to be plotting to take General Washington's life, she thought about asking Mr. Hickey for help. Her father has said, "Trust no one." Still, perhaps she could trust him. She would wait and see. So he is bringing her fancy things like, well, they don't seem fancy to us, but back then they were probably pretty good. Like nice seed that he says he is stealing from the king. Weeks went by. The beautiful house, once so strange to her, was now like a good friend. Phoebe enjoyed using the fine china plates and crystal glasses. She enjoyed serving Mary's deliciously prepared meals to General Washington and his important guests, while Pompey followed solemnly behind with the salt cellar and pepper mill. She knew she was there to save General Washington's life, but there's the bell. But as the days went by and she still heard nothing, she began to wonder if perhaps her father was mistaken. No one seemed to be plotting anything, and it was now the beginning of June. Phoebe had been at Mortier House almost 2 months. All right, they are serving food, and little Pompey following behind with the salt and pepper. Then one day, when she went to the market, her father wasn't there. Phoebe stood by the water a long time, waiting and wondering, should she go to the Queen's Head or back to Mortier House? As she was trying to decide, she saw her father hurrying toward her. He looked very worried. For the first time, he seemed not to care that people might notice them. He held her by the shoulders and looked into her face. "Phoebe," he said urgently, "I have heard that General Washington will be leaving Mortier House in a very few days. The person known as T will act before that time. You must find out who it is." Okay, there's her father rushing toward her with the news that this is going to happen soon. Phoebe's mind was whirling as she hurried back toward the house. She was frightened, but she was also determined. She would save General Washington. She had long ago figured that he would likely be shot. During dinner, he always sat in a chair by the window. He would make an easy target for anyone waiting outside. If only she could get him to change his place away from that window. His good friend, General Gates, would be a dinner guest at the house this evening. Everyone else was part of the family or a member of the bodyguard. Over and over she said their names. No one's name began with a T. As she reached the kitchen door, she saw Hickey sitting on the steps. "Why are you so solemn, pretty Phoebe?" he asked. "Oh, Mr. Hickey, sir," Phoebe said breathlessly, "I'm so worried." She paused. She did need help. Should she tell him? Maybe he knew something, had seen something that escaped her notice. After all, he was a member of the bodyguard. It was his job to protect General Washington. Her father's words came back to her. "Trust no one," he said. "No one." She sighed. She'd have to keep trying, alone. Okay. All right. Boy, that's a big responsibility, isn't it, for this girl? Okay. I think that actually we'll read one more page. "Well," said Hickey after a moment, "I've something to bring back a smile to that pretty face. Fresh June peas for the general's dinner, first of the season. His favorite and mine, and enough for us both. Some friends of the king will be mighty hungry tonight. He handed her a large sack filled to the brim with